All right. Well, hi, everybody. Really glad to be joining you today. Great to see all of you. Um, as Megan said, I'm a national rep with AFT. Before that, I was also a member and a leader in the local that I came from. So, uh, really happy to be talking to additional members today. And what I'd like to talk with you a little bit about is AFT's student debt campaign. So, what I'm going to do is just briefly give you a little bit of background about what's happening with student debt and some of the recent changes that have taken place with federal programs, including primarily public service loan forgiveness. And then I'm also going to share with you a little bit about some AFT member benefit resources that can help you navigate these programs, because we want to make this as simple as possible for folks to use. If you've got questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. And I think somebody will be kind of keeping stack on that so that we'll make sure we get to you. So let's just start out with a little bit of context for what student debt looks like in the United States today. It's been in the news a lot. You've probably heard about it. But there are 45 million people in the United States today who have student debt, totaling about $1.75 trillion with a T overall. It is the biggest source of consumer and personal debt in the United States other than real estate. So bigger than medical debt, bigger than auto loans, bigger than credit card debt. And when we talk about student debt, most of it, in fact, almost all of it, is federal student loan debt. So some people also have private loans through like a private bank or something, but most of this is student loans that people are getting from the federal government itself. And when we think about who is impacted by student debt, how, in particular within our membership, but also the broader community, feels the impact of student debt, I think it's important to recognize that different parts of our community are impacted more deeply by student debt, because it also is a reflection of systematic inequalities in our society. So the research and the evidence shows, for example, that women and people of color of all genders typically have to borrow more to go to school than their counterparts who are not in these categories. For example, Black student loan borrowers typically borrow about $25,000 more to go to college than their white counterparts do. Women typically end up borrowing about 10% more than men do, just generally. And when we look at repayment, what we also see is that both women and people of color, and in particular women of color, take longer to pay their student debts back, struggle more to pay them back, and feel the adverse effects of doing so more deeply. So for example, again, on average, Black women who graduate from a four-year institution, in the first 12 years of paying their student loans back, their student loans actually grow while they're trying to pay them back. During that same time period, white women's student debt decreases by about 20%, and white men's student debt actually decreases by almost half. So we see the reflection of economic inequalities in our society here too, and I think that's important to say. And then, when we look at media portrayals of student debt, oftentimes it's framed as sort of a young person's crisis. It's those millennials in particular, or the Zoomers now, the youngest generations. And that's true, they are struggling with student debt. But this is really a cross-generational issue. Right now, today, about 20% of student loans are being paid back by people who are 60 or older. That's a lot of people. And when we talk about going into default, people who haven't been able to pay their loans in about a year, default is particularly problematic for people who are holding student debt and who are older. They're most likely to be in default, and they're most likely to feel the effects of it. So again, if we think about some statistics, people who are 65 and older and who are still paying back their student loans, about a quarter of those folks are in default. And people who are 75 or older, and this is kind of horrifying to me, 75 or older and paying back their student debt, more than half of them are in default on their student loans. Now, this is particularly difficult for people who might be retired and living on a fixed income, like Social Security or something, because when you're in default on your federal student loans, if you're working, your paycheck can get garnished. But if you're retired, your Social Security can also be garnished. And so these are people who are really, really struggling and don't have a lot of good options. And when we talk about this in the general public, this isn't the group that folks tend to think about, but it is increasingly the group that's really, really struggling with this burden. So with that rosy picture in mind, what I'd like to do is share a little bit of information about some programs that AFT helps members access. And these are free federal programs. This is not something that you need to pay to do, but these programs are complicated. And so we do a lot of work to try to educate members about it and help members get access to these programs. And I'm just going to share a little bit of information about two of those programs because they work together. And I want to tell you that we also run a much longer and more in-depth student debt clinic. It's about a 90-minute program where we go into detail on how these programs work. But the two things that I want to share with you are income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness, because they work together as a team. The idea of income-driven repayment is that if you've got student debt, you can pay back your debt based on how much you make and your family size, rather than based on how much you owe. And the whole purpose of this is to keep student debt from overwhelming people. This is, again, a free federal program that is available in one form or another to all student loan borrowers. And there are some details about how those programs work, but I want to just give you the basics here. If you're in an income-driven plan, by itself, after 20 or 25 years, if you still have a student loan balance, that gets forgiven, but it may be taxable. There are a lot of rules for these programs. One of the really important ones is that if you're in an income-driven repayment plan, you do have to certify your income every year because that's what drives how much you pay. And very importantly, in an income-driven plan, that's one of the types of plans you have to be in order to get credit towards public service loan forgiveness. So in our student debt clinic, we spend a little bit more time than this, kind of drilling down into the details of how those work. The second, and probably the more impactful program that I want to share with you, is public service loan forgiveness. And when public service loan forgiveness was created by the federal government in 2007, I think it's helpful to note that it had bipartisan support in Congress and that it was actually signed into law by Republican President George W. Bush. So this is not a partisan thing. It's an attempt to encourage people to enter into public service. At that time, and I think probably it's fair to say since then too, there was sort of a recognition that public service jobs, teaching, healthcare, public employees generally, they often don't pay as well as private sector jobs. And let's face it, it's really hard work to do those jobs. And sometimes the benefits are also not amazing. So the federal government was looking for ways to encourage people to enter into the public service, and that's the genesis of this program. For public service loan forgiveness, the promise was, if you work for 10 years and you're making payments during that time for 10 years on your loans, you're working in the public service, which either means you're working for a government entity like a public school or a public hospital or a city or municipal government or something like that, or if you work for a 501c3 nonprofit, which is pretty much all nonprofits, almost all, then you can get your student loans forgiven after making 10 years of payments. So that seems really simple. That was the promise. That was the idea of this program. And to give you a sense of how income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness work, or at least were intended to work, I want to share with you a really brief example. This is Anna. She's a real person. Anna teaches in Philadelphia. She's a public school teacher. And she has an adjusted gross income of $46,000 and a family size of 4. So Anna relatively recently graduated from college. She has a direct federal student loan of $37,000. Now, when you graduate from college and you start repaying your student loan, if you don't do anything, you automatically get put into a 10-year payment plan that works kind of like a fixed mortgage. They take how much did you borrow, they figure out how much interest gets added to that, and then they divide it up into 10 years worth of equal payments. So that's the automatic plan that everybody gets put in if you don't choose something else. And if Anna were in that 10-year payment plan, she'd pay $353 a month for 10 years, and then she'd be done. Now, if Anna uses one of those income-driven repayment plans, her payments would be $36.46 a month. Now, I don't know about you, but probably most of us could stand to have an extra $310 a month. Is a really big difference, right? Now, that's a big difference by itself, and that's just the income-driven repayment. But when we couple that with public service loan forgiveness, which was the idea of these programs, then what we see looks like this. Anna borrowed $37,000. Assuming that poor Anna doesn't get a raise for 10 years and nothing else changes, her family size stays the same, her pay stays exactly the same, she would pay that $36 and change a month for 10 years. That would add up to paying about $4,375 in total over the 10 years that she's paying. And then she gets the rest of her student loans forgiven tax-free because she spent her 10 years working in the public service. So you can kind of see the extent to which this is a real incentive for people to enter the public service, to stay in the public service. And even though maybe they don't have an amazing salary, it makes the prospect of being a teacher or a support staff person or a healthcare worker or a public employee more realistic for people. That's the promise. That's how this is supposed to work. The problem is that public service loan forgiveness has a ton of rules, and these rules are really complicated. And so what actually ended up happening is that from 2007, when the program was created, up until quite recently, people thought that they were following all of the rules of this program, only to discover at the end of their 10 years worth of payments that they'd gotten tripped up somewhere along the way, that it was very difficult for them to know, and in some cases impossible for them to know, that they had gotten caught up in one of the loopholes in this law, and that in fact they had not met the criteria to get their loans forgiven. And so in 2017, when the first group of people who went through all of this finished their 10 years payment and thought they were going to get loan forgiveness, what we saw is that 99% of people who applied for forgiveness were denied. And that has continued to be the case up until October of this last year. So here, I just listed out the 5 basic criteria that you have to meet in order to have qualified for public service loan forgiveness. And again, in our student debt clinic, we go into this in more depth. But what I'll say here is that most people who get tripped up on questions 3 and 4. They either had an older kind of student loan. That's most of us who had student loans prior to 2010. And those older types of federal student loans didn't qualify for loan forgiveness, or they were in a different kind of a repayment plan, like a 25 or a 30-year repayment plan or an extended repayment plan. There are some that are even longer than that. And those don't count either towards this program. But these programs were poorly explained to people. The details of them were often really unclear. And the companies that the federal government contracts with, the student loan servicers, that are supposed to help people navigate this whole system, didn't do a very good job. In fact, they did such a poor job that the AFT sued one of them, Navient, which you may remember, to force them to administer this program properly. And more recently than that, the AFT also sued the Federal Department of Education, alleging that they were failing to make this program work for people, that they were not implementing it properly. Now, those lawsuits, and the one against the Federal Education Department in particular, that was settled in October. And as part of that settlement—
talking about student loan forgiveness in the lawsuit, you should be listening to this to get your payments.
Yeah, get your family members and your friends around because this matters. Totally. So when that lawsuit was settled, one of the things that came out of that settlement was an expansion of the public service loan forgiveness program. And this is really the key thing. From now until October 31st of this year, the rules on public service loan forgiveness have been dramatically relaxed so that nearly every federal student loan qualifies and nearly every payment plan qualifies, and almost all of the other loopholes that people got stuck in are at least temporarily suspended. This means that if people have worked in the public service and they've been making payments, and either they got told that those payments weren't going to count, or they applied for loan forgiveness and were denied in the past, that you can retroactively get credit for those payments right now, and you may actually have made enough payments to get your loans forgiven. Now, we can answer more questions about this, but I do want to mention that one thing that hasn't changed is that while you're making payments, you still have to have made the 120 payments while working full-time in the public service. But for those of you who have retired and you're realizing right now, perhaps, that, oh my gosh, maybe you qualify for this waiver, for this relaxation of the rules, if you've already made your 120 payments, even if you've retired, this can apply retroactively, and you may get your student debts discharged today. Well, now.
Lisa, we have a question from Louise Jordan.
Yeah, go ahead, Louise.
Hello. I'm a sort of in a bind because I have just retired after 41 years of teaching, and my son just graduated from college. So it's sort of bad timing. And now I have a Parent Plus loan. And of course, I'm retired now, so I don't have this option to do this this program. Is there any program for someone who has already retired and has not made any payments because their child has just graduated?
The unfortunate news is not really. However, Parent Plus loans do qualify for one of those income-driven plans. It's called income contingent repayment. And it may be to your interest to look into that. Income contingent repayment is not super generous to the borrower. It's not amazing, but it still might be something worth looking at for you.
Okay, that's not very good news. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. I don't want to say that these programs fix everything, because that wouldn't be true. The way that we fund higher education in the United States continues to be really deeply problematic. And this program is trying to fix one sliver of the wrongs that have already occurred. But as a union, we continue to fight for equity in higher education and access, because this is not enough.
Thank you.
You bet. So let me just share two more things really briefly, and then we can do some more question and answers here. If you want to take advantage of this, you have to take some proactive steps, and you've got to do it before October of this year. If you currently or previously have worked in the public service while you were making payments on your federal loans and you want to get credit for that, there's a form that you have to fill out and submit. And you have to do that for each public employer or public service employer that you're trying to get credit for having made payments while you worked there. Additionally, if you have older student loans that are before from 2010 in particular, they might be what are called federal family education loans, or FFEL loans, or they might be Perkins loans. For most people after 2010, you probably have direct loans. But if you have these older kinds of loans, they do need to be consolidated into what's called a direct consolidation loan in order to count for this program. Right now, you can do that and still get credit for the payments that you've already made on those loans. And so that's an important thing that you would need to do before October 31st, 2022. And I want to be very, very clear, when we're talking about consolidating, we are not talking about leaving the federal system. We're not talking about consolidating with like a private bank, because if you do that, then you lose access to these federal programs. And additionally, if you're not currently on an income-driven repayment plan, You'll want to get on one of those because that's a requirement for eligibility for these programs. If there are folks who previously applied and you've been denied access to loan forgiveness, there is an automatic process that's happening to review those denials. But I would encourage you to just refile the paperwork anyway so that you don't end up in November or December realizing that somehow you got overlooked. The Federal Department of Education told us last week that they think that there are about 100,000 people who've previously been denied who are going to get credit, and to the tune of about $6 billion. So, that's no small change. But I also want to say, this is really complicated stuff, and I just threw a lot of details at you in a very short amount of time. So what we're encouraging AFT members to do is to use a free AFT member benefit called Summer. Summer is a group that AFT is partnered with on student debt who really understands this issue and shares a lot of our values about how these programs ought to work. And what Summer does is it helps people navigate how to fill out the forms, how to get those forms submitted, all the little details. And they can also answer your individual situation questions to help you figure out what the right choices are for you. It's all online. You can fill out the forms right in their app. And again, as an AFT member, you have access to this as a free benefit. So to get access to it, to use it, you're going to need to do three things. The first is if you don't already have an AFT member benefits account, you'll need to create one. And we can help you walk through that process if needed. Second is you have to sign up with Summer once you have your AFT member benefit account. And the third is there is some additional information that you might need in order to get those forms filled out. Summer will walk you through how to find that information. They're really good about it, but I just want you to know that you may need some additional things. So again, this waiver on public service loan forgiveness means that people are going to get their debts forgiven all the way going back to 2007, even though up until right now, they may have been told that they didn't qualify for that program. And it's going to be life-changing for people. We've got people with $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in student debt forgiven who email us every day and say, oh my gosh, it finally worked. And this is in no small part because of the work we all together have done as a union to fight for this issue. And we still have more to do, as Louise points out. But we really want to make sure you get to take advantage of this. And we really want to encourage folks to use Summer because Summer will help you navigate this kind of complicated process and ensure that you don't miss out on any deadlines so that you can get the benefit. And finally, I'm just going to put this up here, but we will also, as I said, share this out with you. Here's some useful links. We do run a debt clinic program if you wanted to request one for your membership. If you have a local where that makes sense to do, you can do that. We also run a weekly debt clinic webinar that you can register for. Anyone can register for that webinar. And then finally, if you have general questions about how does this work or what is AFT doing, you're welcome to email me and I'll do my best to answer. So let me stop there. What questions have folks got? And I'm going to stop screen sharing too.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't see the hand raised. Oh,
Hi, Elizabeth. What's up?
yeah, here. Okay, I just raised my hand. I was a little confused. Did you say that this is only for people that date as a fall in October, next fall, right? Is that only for people who have done the full 10 years? Is that what you said?
No. For people who have already done the 10 years of payments but didn't get credit for them previously, it may be that they get a whole 10 years worth of credit and their debts get completely forgiven. But for people who have some payments that didn't previously get counted, but they don't have the whole 10 years worth, you can still get credit for some of those payments so that it moves you ahead. It gets you closer to the 10 years.
So you don't have to just, so anyone can do it, basically. They don't have to be people who were, I don't know why I thought you said it was the full 10 years. Okay. What about new people? Or is that a whole different thing?
So for
who
new
become
people,
teachers now, or social workers, or whatever they do, school social workers. That's yeah.
yeah. So for people who are just starting to pay their loans right now, the goal is to get them set up so that they don't fall into any of these traps going forward. And also, I should add that the AFT continues to advocate really strongly to simplify the way that this works, and also to advocate for free and equitable access to higher education for everybody. But for new people, it's mainly about getting them on track to start with. But for those of us, like, I was paying my loans off starting in the 90s, as probably some of us here were. For those of us who got off the track years ago, the waiver gives you a chance to kind of fix that going backwards. And so that's the
Summer,
key.
okay. Can the young people, can somebody who's applying now use summer, or is this just for this waiver?
No,
some-
summer is for every AFT member.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Somebody who just started teaching or something could use it and has loan. I mean, just finished college, but they have to be an AFT member. I see.
Yeah, that's right. And what summer helps people do also is it sends reminders when it's time to fill a form out again, things like that. So it's really helpful. So I think I see Julie's hand up.
Yes, thank you. We were talking about this at our teacher leader program, and we had some teachers who have already been forgiven $65,000 and they are ecstatic. It's changing their life forever and for their kids. But one of the things that we were talking about, and I was not sure of, and I said I would try to find out from AFT, so I'm glad we're here today. For the last 2 years under COVID, student loan repayments had a waiver, and someone was told that that waiver period during COVID, that those years and days will count. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is. For the entire time that the pause has been in effect, yeah, all of those months count towards the 10 years worth of payments.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
You bet.
And we also have a question in the chat from Paula. She asked, she said she's going to retire next year and she's just starting loans, so this will not work, correct?
Yeah, so Paula, if you have not made any payments on any loans at all, unfortunately, yeah, that's mostly true. But what I would encourage you to do, and Louise, this might help you too, is you still may want to use summer, because summer will help you make sure that you've got your paperwork lined up properly, even if all you're doing is the income-driven repayment part and not the public service loan forgiveness part. Now, income-driven repayment isn't the best option for every person. It kind of depends a little bit on your individual finances, but summer can kind of help you figure out, is this a good option or not? So I would still encourage you to use that. But unfortunately, yeah, if you haven't made payments on your loans yet, and you're retiring, then you probably won't get the benefit of public service loan forgiveness.
And it looks like we have a question from Walter.
Hi, Walter.
You're on mute. There we go.
Walter, I'm afraid we can't hear you.
All right, how about now?
Yes.
Good, all right. I had problems with my microphone. I just want to clarify one thing. The programs that you talked about today are exclusively for the aid and benefit of AFT members. But loan forgiveness program is anybody that qualifies. It's not necessarily an AFT member. For example, my granddaughter has loan. She's a teacher, but not an AFT. She's somewhere else. There is a loan forgiveness program somewhere for her to go to.
Yeah, so let me clarify that. That's a really important question. Those income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness programs that I just talked about, those are federal government programs. They're for anybody who works in the, well, income-driven repayment is for anybody who has federal loans. And public service loan forgiveness is for anybody who works in the public service. So your granddaughter probably fits those criteria unless she's working for a for-profit school. There's not that many of those.
No, she's a public school, but not AFT represented.
Yeah, so she could use those. Summer is an AFT member benefit to help you navigate those programs, but you don't have to use summer to access those programs. The one thing I will say is there are a lot of companies out there who will charge people a lot of money, hundreds or thousands of dollars, to fill out the paperwork for these free federal programs. And you do not want to pay them because these are free federal programs. And if a company comes to you and says, hey, pay us hundreds or thousands of dollars to do the paperwork for you, they may be a scam. So you can access these programs for free. What I'll do is I will also share with Chris and Megan the federal government website for how to do that. But if you're an AFT member, Summer can help you make it through that process. I hope that helped.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. And Chris, do we have other questions or are we all set?
It looks like we are all set.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. It was great to join you today.
Thank you.
so much for joining us, Lisa.
You bet. Take care, everybody.
Folks, we have Elizabeth Parisian up next, and she's going to go over our pension program and kind of where things are at with a few updates, I think, from a special guest. So, there you are.
All right. Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Parisian. I am Associate Director of Research, Strategic Initiatives, and Economic Security with the American Federation of Teachers. And my specific role is to lead the capital strategies work of the union. So in my role, I work to support AFT members who serve as pension fund trustees. And I also work on issues related to pensions and investments and retirement security for all of our members. So let me see if I can share my screen. Because I have some slides to share with you. Let's see. All right. Can you see this? Okay. Okay, so, I think what I want to talk about today is share with you a little bit about the work that the Capital Strategies Department of the AFT has been doing, specifically thinking about our pension funds as more than just a benefit that we are all going to collect in retirement, but really a source of power for union members, and also, a way for the AFT to have a voice in our economy and in financial markets, and then finally ways that you all can get involved. So let me start by just kind of giving an overview of the AFT and our pension funds. So we think of pension funds as workers' capital, right? This is money, these are your deferred wages, right, that are put into the pension fund. So it's not, some benefit out of the goodness of your employer's heart that they're giving to you. This is actually, public employees elected to put aside a portion of their wages, to defer a portion of their wages into a pension fund to be collected in the future in retirement. That's one of the great benefits of being a public employee. If you total up all of the US public pension funds right now, they probably total about $4.5 trillion in assets. So I'm talking about, your state teachers pension fund and your local firefighters fund and all of these state and city pension funds across the country totals about 4.5 trillion, excuse me. To put that in context, that's more than the economies of most countries. So I've got this chart up here. You can see that with the exception of Japan, India, US, and China, US public pension funds assets would be the 5th largest country in the world, right? And looking at public pension funds as a whole, US public pension funds serve close to 15 million active members and 11.2 million retirees. It's really important I always want to emphasize that pension funds, this is a giant pool of money and it's workers' money. And in many cases, AFT members or other union members are actually elected to serve on the boards of these pension funds and make decisions about how it's invested. So this really is a very important way that unions can actually make sure that money is invested in a way and that our economy works in a way that reflects our values and works in ways that helps our members, students, communities, and doesn't harm our members. So good to remember the kind of the overall impact of pensions, right? I mean, number one, it provides a lifetime income for retirees and their spouse if they have one, right? But it's also a really important recruitment and retention tool. We know, I think as Lisa mentioned, you know, we know that public service does not always pay as well as the private sector. And so this is a really important way to get good people into public service because it really is an excellent benefit. But besides the personal benefit of having a pension, pensions are also provide a huge economic benefit to our communities and our states. One study found that each dollar invested by taxpayers in public pensions supports over $8 in economic activities. So when you hear these anti-pension folks say, oh, pensions are a drag on our economy, we can't afford this, we actually can't afford to not have pensions, right? When you think about someone who's retired, living in a community, they're gonna spend their pension check at the shoe store and at the local, you know, coffee shop and all of these things that keep our economy running. Quick distinction it's important to make between defined benefit pensions and 401ks, sometimes referred to as defined contribution retirement savings, is that the median 401k balance in 2020 was $28,000. That means the median person with a 401k only had $28,000 total in that account. I think we all know that that's not going to get you very far in retirement. Compare that to the average public sector pension annual benefit of $28,000. That's what the average public sector retiree is going to be receiving annually in retirement. So pension funds, I can't underscore enough, pension funds do so much to provide retirement security for union members. And finally, pensions are invested broadly in the economy, and that's partly where a lot of the power of pensions comes from, right? Because if you're an investor in a company, or you have a say, right? The way a pension fund allocates money obviously has an economic impact, but also can be a reflection of members and participants in the pension plan. Really quick, it's important to show that defined benefit plans have declined with union density. That's not a coincidence, right? It's unions that bargained for and created public pension plans, and it's unions that are fighting to protect them. And the fewer union members you have, the less likely you are to have a defined benefit pension plan that's secure and in good shape. So I put these two headlines up here just to kind of transition into the way we in the Capital Strategies department and a lot of our members, frankly, think about pension funds, which it's more than just money that's invested in order to pay for retirement. You know, this headline here says a giant pile of money, right? 4.5 trillion in defined benefit pension plans. You know that Wall Street wants to get its hands on it, just like Wall Street is trying its very best to get its hand on the US education budget. They see a giant pile of money they want to extract as much as possible and put it in their own pockets. Right. And in a lot of cases, and we'll get into this in a little more detail, a lot of what this amounts to is looting the pension funds, right? Wall Street actors like private equity firms and hedge funds and venture capital, they see this money and they've figured out how to convince public pension funds to hand it over to them, charge high fees in the process. It's posed a real challenge to the security of our pension funds. And a lot of the work that we've been doing has been pointing out that there is a better way. It doesn't have to be this way, right? We can maintain workers' capital can stay in our pension funds. It doesn't have to flow out. It doesn't have to be transferred to Wall Street, who we all know certainly doesn't always have the best interests of public employees at heart. So a little bit about our Capital Strategies program. We do trustee education, support, recruitment, and retention, right? So we're trying to, for the folks that are already serving as trustees, we want to support them. And we also work with locals to help recruit folks, both active members and retirees, to run for pension boards and fill those positions. We do capital stewardship, which is just a kind of a broad term for paying attention to how workers' capital is invested, and trying to guide that and make it more responsible, make it more reflective of our values, and help hold corporate America and Wall Street accountable through our investments. We do work on Wall Street reform, right? Trying to bring more accountability to the finance sector. We do a lot of work on defined benefit protection, because I know in states across the country, the right wingers are, trying to make public pension funds a thing of the past. And so we do a lot of work to fight back against that. We do work on retirement security in general. So, recognizing that most AFT members are very lucky to have a defined benefit pension plan. But we want everyone. We want, whether you have that benefit or not, we want everyone to be able to retire with security. And then finally, we support affiliates working to pass legislation to add seats to pension funds for AFT members. So recent examples of where we've done that are Illinois, New Mexico, New Hampshire. These are places where prior there was not an opportunity for an AFT member to serve as a pension fund trustee, and through legislation, we created that. Okay, so I've been talking about pension fund trustees. And I'm going to put up here, just to give you an idea, this is kind of the average pension fund. So most pension funds have a board of trustees, right? These are the folks that generally oversee the fund and make broad decisions about how the fund is invested. So you can see here, if you look at the composition of a typical pension fund board, my picture here is in the way, I can't read my own screen. Okay, there we go. A little over 50% of the board are plan participants. And then there will typically be, about a third of the board will be for the general public. Often this is someone who has some kind of financial expertise. Often that the general public folks are appointed by the governor, but not always. Sometimes they are elected as well. And then there's usually a slice of ex officio seats. So, the state treasurer, for example, might sit on the board. So pension fund trustees have a hard job, right? Because these are people who are rank and file members often, or retirees, don't necessarily have a background in finance. Their job is to act solely in the interest of plan participants, right? So they're not there to look out for their own personal interests, but for everyone in the plan. They appoint and oversee the executives of the fund. So they might hire the CEO, for example, and the other consultants that work with the fund. They oversee fund investments. And most importantly, public pension fund trustees are there to ensure that pension dollars are not invested in ways that harm plan participants. And I'll give a few examples of what that has looked like. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about the AFT Trustee Council. So this is a group that's comprised of AFT members who serve as pension fund trustees. And we provide training and support to this group, right? We also provide networking, professional development opportunities, and support for organizing around pension issues. And really, we work with trustees to take action on issues that impact AFT members, working people, and communities. And I have a lot of examples of, including one from last week, of the good work that the Trustee Council has done. But in general, over the years, we've focused on a couple different areas, right? The Trustee Council has looked at anti-pension investments. So you may have seen these over the years. We put out a few reports exposing investment managers who manage AFT member pension funds, but then also support anti-pension efforts. So in a way, it's like investing in the very people who are trying to destroy your pension. We've looked at private equity, right, and the risks that it poses to pension funds around way too high fees, privatization, the harm that private equity does to communities, private prisons, gun manufacturers, following some school shootings. We heard from a lot of members wanting to make sure that their pension fund wasn't funding companies that make assault weapons, for example. And investment fees, right? The average pension fund pays hundreds of millions of dollars a year in fees to hedge fund and private equity managers. We believe that this is a huge source of pension underfunding. So we've paid a lot of attention to it and mobilized our members around it over the years. This is just an example of our private prisons work. A couple of years ago, we put out a series of 2 reports looking at pension fund investments in private prisons and the risks that poses. I think, the average AFT member understands very well the school to prison pipeline. And we heard loud and clear from members, especially around Trump's immigration, where he was locking up children at the border. We heard from members saying, we want to make sure our pension funds are not funding this. So we put out these reports, and what we saw in pretty quick succession is a number of pension funds, most pension funds, in fact, announced that they would be divesting from private prisons, which is a victory, in terms of making sure our members' money isn't invested in something that hurts, the students that AFT members teach, but also as an example of kind of the power that pension funds have in the market. I mean, these were good investments, with like a high stock value. And in a matter of months, the private prison companies were, kind of like junk stocks, lost all of their access to banks, to bank financing, because one after another banks were saying, we're not gonna fund this, right? So it really shows that the power of pension investments can have in our economy and in holding bad actors accountable. Last year, we put out a report on private equity. And basically the report took a look at, a huge portion of a significant portion of public pension fund dollars are invested in private equity firms. Private equity firms are the companies that, buy up a company. Like Toys R Us is a very good recent example, right? They buy up a company, they kind of drive it into the ground, they load it up with debt, they use that debt to pay themselves, right? And if the company ends up in bankruptcy, like Toys R Us, it doesn't really matter for the private equity firm, right? Because they've already made money off of it by paying themselves from the debt. I can get more in the weeds on how private equity works, but take it from me, it's a problematic kind of investment. So we put out a report exposing that, and what we found is that, a lot of different pension funds responded, right? And started questioning their private equity investments. And I think that a lot of, we've heard from a lot of AFT members about this specifically, right? Because these investments are so expensive and can do so much harm. And how can we make sure that we're not funding the types of things that hurt our communities and are bad for our economy? This is a quick example. I'm actually going to skip over this because we might have someone who might be able to speak to this very quickly, but we're seeing members mobilize around issues with their pension funds related to investment fees, related to things like private equity fees in Ohio, where they haven't seen a COLA in years and years and years. Folks actually commissioned an audit of their pension fund and found that the amount paid in Wall Street fees would be more than enough to fund the COLA, right? So that's raising serious questions at the fund. I'm excited to share this with you. This was actually last week. The AFT Trustee Council met in person, and President Weingarten was there, and she issued a letter to pension fund trustees calling on them to divest from investments in Russia. A lot of pension funds already have started taking a look at the issue or have divested, but the Trustee Council unanimously voted to pass a resolution saying that we will do, the Trustee Council will review their pension funds exposure to Russia and take whatever steps necessary to pull out of those investments. So that's another example of how pension fund investments in real time can have an impact on global events. All right, so what can AFT retirees do around pension issues? So I think there are a number of things. At a very base level, you can understand how your pension fund is invested and ask, do the investments reflect union values, right? And part of a way of getting to that understanding is participate in public pension meetings, right? Like, see what they're talking about, see what they're not talking about, right? See what questions come up. If anyone's been to these meetings, a lot of it is very dry. A lot of it is very, you'll have investment managers come in and, give you some pitch about why the fund should give them $200 million. Like, see what kind of questions are being asked or what question you would ask about that, right? You can raise issues of concerns with trustees and staff at your pension fund, right? So for those of you who know, who have an AFT member who serves as a pension fund trustee on your fund, and you can reach out to them on anything, right? I mean, we've got members mobilizing around climate and investments. Again, like gun manufacturers has popped up again, workers' rights, diversity and equity and inclusion, and racial justice with respect to investments. So if you have an issue that you care about, you can raise that, right, with your pension fund and your trustees. And I would also say consider running for pension board seats. This is really important. Retirees have a unique role on pension fund boards because you've got a lot of skin in the game, right? I mean, you're collecting your benefits, and it matters very much to you whether your fund can continue, for example, providing your cost of living increase, right? So it's really important that if you find that you're interested in pension issues, you don't have to be a finance expert. That's what we're here for, to provide that kind of support. What we really need is union leaders and retiree leaders to consider running for these boards so that we have good representation on those boards. And then finally, you can work to increase participant representation on pension boards. So if you find yourself in a place where AFT or maybe even labor as a whole doesn't have a seat on your fund, that's a fight worth having to get better representation for the AFT on your board. So I'm going to stop here, but I just want to show you. I think you'll get a copy of these slides. I have some resources in those slides. So we have some national pension organizations that we're allied with. If you kind of want to dig into some of this more deeply, these are the organizations. And we also have links to all of the reports that we've done over the years on these issues in case you want to read more about it and dive a little more deeply into it. But I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Hi, I see we have a question from Walter.
Walter, oh, there you go.
I just unmuted myself. I've listened to a number of these pension presentations by FT over the years, and this is one of the best ones I've seen. So thank you for that. Just briefly by myself, I sit on my town's pension board for that. It's a small pension facility, but roughly $70 million fund for there. So it's not huge. And prior to that, I did the same thing for the hospital I worked with. So about 20 years, 25 years worth of sitting on a pension board. And I can't emphasize how important that is to the members around the country, particularly with what it's invested in and the costs. And they should be all well known. The second thing, and this is more of a comment and criticism to AFT in general, AFT has now got a lot of private sector members, and that area is growing, and they don't have pensions. They have 401ks or 403bs, depending on the size of the facility or the facility itself. And there's not a lot of information there. I find a lot of people do not know anything about it. What's good for them. They depend on the salesperson that comes in that. So I was wondering if AFT could work up something that's specific for the defined contribution plans that a lot of our members are starting to get into. And also for retirees, most of them have a 403b. And they need information on how to invest, what to do, how to draw money out of that, how not to get into trouble about those things. So I wish AFT would work up something exclusively for the defined contribution portion of retirements. That's to my comments. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Walter, and thank you for your many, many years of service as a pension fund trustee. I know it's not easy, and
No.
it doesn't matter how big or small the fund. It's such an important job. But you make a really good point, and I will certainly bring that back and see what we can do, because you're right. We do have a number of members who have 401ks, and the way a 401k is designed, it shifts the risk onto the individual person, right? If you're in a defined benefit, the risk is
On the employer.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so how much you're going to receive each month in retirement. With a 401k, you have no idea, and if you retire, a month after the market crashes, that's all on you. And I think it also requires you to be an investment expert, right? Which most people simply, don't have the time to become, right? So I think you're absolutely right, and we should. There's a lot we can do in terms of supporting those members.
We have a question from Paula.
Hi, I'm a hospital employee, and I'm glad that he said that. I am, our pension was frozen, so I know what my fixed amount is going to be. However, when you earlier talked about where they're putting our money, even our 401k and our 403b, now that's frozen for me. It's only a 401k. People don't understand that that's all they're going to get when they retire, if they have Social Security. And they're so not educated. And also that our money with the 403b and the 401k, they're turning it and investing into themselves as a conglomerate institution of 8 hospitals. So how safe is that money? How safe is any of our money that's invested? But still, they're investing all our money into themselves. And that scares me. So it is quite a scary time because you really don't have a lot of control over what they do with the money you're investing. That was all. It was just really a statement. But pensions are really most hospitals don't have them anymore. So, no one has a pension and they're just living on 401ks and they don't understand it all.
Right. Yeah, and thank you for that. And I believe that's by design, right? I mean, like everyone saw that, the workers' capital is powerful. And there's a lot of folks out there that don't believe that rank and file union members should have any kind of control over that kind of capital or should have any kind of security in retirement. So unfortunately that's by design, but we're doing a lot to fight back on that.
And I see we also have Julie. Julie, would you like to speak about what you're seeing in Ohio and the state retirement board out there?
Yes. First, I would like to say I am running as an active contributing member for the state teachers pension in Ohio. And Elizabeth Jones is also on this call, and she's running for the retiree seat. And Elizabeth Jones is a retired CFT member, and she's president of the CFT retiree chapter of CFT. And the two of us are running together as a partnership. And our messaging is, you must make sure that the system works for the actives and for the retirees. And that must be done together. Because if you only look at it from the retiree, more actives will want to step out of the system, which then destabilizes it for everyone. But I'm really happy that we're going to have the support from AFT. Liz and I are already getting pushback from the management of STRS. They're putting all kinds of rumors out on social media, not as much against Liz as much as me. And so it's just the time that you have to take to squelch those rumors. I believe that we have a really good chance of winning, and it's really scaring those administrators. People are already saying we're not qualified to serve. And I said, what is giving the person who is the active or the retiree currently, what gives them their qualifications? And so we have to take control of our money. It is our money, it is our investments, and they are making very irresponsible investments that we have to oversee and watch. So I appreciate all the help from AFT. I have really thick skin because I've been president for 13 years. And you know that as any president, you have to get really thick skin. And so to me, it doesn't upset me that I'm in this situation, but I do think that it's important at this time for every teacher in the state. I've always fought for the teachers in my local, but now I'll be fighting for teachers and their futures for the whole entire state. So, Liz? Elizabeth Jones.
Ditto what Julie said. I appreciate the support of AFT, and Elizabeth, I want all the publications you have and that list of resources as we election is being held next month. And this time, Julie and I are going to be on that board, and we're going to be bringing the heat, the questions. We want to change things. And so with your help, we can do that.
And Elizabeth, if you could send me the report, send both of us the report, because I'm already making a binder of resources. So when I go, I can just pull out some kind of resource that's highlighted and kind of shove it in their face.
Absolutely happy to do it. And we're working on something else, another resource for you both too. But thank you both for running. I know it's, it's a good thing that it's making that pension fund very nervous, because you're right. I think it means you have a very good chance of winning. And, we really need those kinds of voices. And I think the critique you're getting, or the criticism that you're not qualified, you don't know enough. I mean, that's, again, you don't have to be an expert in finances to be a good steward of your members' money. You have to be a member of your community. You have to care about, workers' rights and responsible investment. And that's what it takes. And, they're scared to have people who aren't just 100% aligned with Wall Street, be on the fund, because you're going to ask questions, you're going to shake things up, and you're going to demand answers in a way that, a lot of the Wall Street folks will never do.
Right before OFT's convention a couple of weeks ago, we met with the retirement committee, met with the leadership of STRS. And all I did was ask him one or two simple questions, and he totally became unglued. I mean, everybody in the room was shocked that he really lost it that easily. And so I know that he's worried about it. And it was after that some of the attacks against me started happening. But they know that I've been there. They know Liz has been there. That photo that you showed from the STRS protest that we had, if you look, I'm on there. I think Liz is on there. We were all there that day. So this isn't something that I just came out of the woodwork and said, oh, I think I want to do this. I'm doing it because I've been fighting for a long time. When they made the changes and they had to phase out, Elizabeth, you'll enjoy this. I missed it by 5 days, the phase out, because my birthday was July 5th and the phase out ended June 30th. So don't tell me, there's probably no one who was hit harder than me in the whole entire state. So I'm happy to do it. I had the time to do it, and I have the ability, with the help of OFT and AFT, to be able to do this fight for all of us.
Thank you. And I see that, Walter, you have your hand up again.
A quick reaction to what Paula said. I went through the same thing with a pension being frozen and switched over to a 401k. But what we were able to do on the 401k was negotiate a position on the board or committee, whatever, that decided who was going to administer the 401k, what investments they were going to allow, and the cost of them. Otherwise, it's all up to the employer. The employee has no choice. So you really need to be aware of that. Thank you.
And then last but certainly not least, I see Renee.
Oh, good. The pension issue is very interesting. Yeah. However, I've got a question about the previous presentation, the student debt, and I posed my question to everyone. But basically, my state, Washington State, AFT Washington, has been working with the state legislators on the issue of student debt, and I'm a little confused over what the relationship is between the states, how they're handling the issue of student debt, and the national. I mean, I personally have a loan, several loans, because after I went to finished up my bachelor's degree on my own, not my parents' help, I went to do a master's and then did some post-grad work. And so I have all that student debt, and it's from different states. In any event, so I worked with my state, which was New Mexico, early on, and actually they were very, very helpful. Pretty much answering a lot of questions that have been brought up today. However, I don't quite understand, the relationship between state and the national. So we're looking at are we looking at, yes, someone just give me a little brief idea of what the relationship between, national, when I say national, I'm talking about Congress, the Senate and the US House. So I'm not sure if I made my question clear, but.
I can answer that if you'd like.
Good. Who's talking?
This is Lisa.
Good.
I'm the person that did the student debt presentation previously.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So the programs that I mentioned, income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness, those are federal programs that were put in place by Congress and the federal government. And as such, they're available to the entire country. And it's okay if people have moved from one state to another because those are federal programs that apply everywhere. Now, in addition to that, there's been a recognition, especially in the last 6 to 8 years, that student loan borrowers deserve to have some basic protections against abusive practices by the companies that collect student loans, that administer the student loan portfolio for the federal government. And so many states, and Washington, I'm pretty sure is one of them, have put into place a student borrower bill of rights and some basic protections to prevent abusive practices and scams, or at least to try to crack down on those. So Washington, I think, has been actually a leader in doing that kind of work at the state level. Now, in addition to that, some states, but this varies from one to the next, have state level student loan forgiveness programs that are specific to citizens of that state. I don't know if New Mexico or Washington specifically do, because I haven't looked into theirs in that level of detail recently, but it's possible that they do. And then finally, Washington State has recently, in their state legislature, recently been discussing a variety of ways to make accessing student loan forgiveness a little bit easier, in particular for people who are adjunct or contingent faculty in higher ed, because one of the requirements is that you have to have worked at least 30 hours a week for at least 8 months of the year. But folks that work in those kinds of contingent jobs, and this can sometimes be true in healthcare facilities too, sometimes they might work in 2 or 3 different places and all of them are part-time. So you'd have to add it up, like stack them up on top of each other to get to full-time. And so some states are trying to set a framework that makes it easier for people to do that, and that tells employers that they have to, play ball and do that fairly. But states cannot change the rules of the federal program. All they can do is say, well, in our state, you have these protections, and this is how we want things to work. I don't know. Does that help? Okay.
And it looks like we have another thought, comment, question from Elizabeth.
Okay, in terms of our managers at STRS in Ohio, I found it interesting that in one of their last publications, they were saying to the members that they should investigate opening a 403B or so forth, and this is a defined benefit plan. And so, Elizabeth, I want to talk to you, and there have been a lot of questions. We have a couple of forums on Facebook where people can express their views about what's going on with our state pension. And so there have been a lot of questions raised about, I want to take my money out of STRS with all the problems and open up a 403B or whatever. And so I want to talk to you about some talking points for people who are even considering that, knowing that a defined benefit plan you can't outlive and versus a defined contribution, which, as you just showed, you're going to do a lot better with defined benefit versus defined contribution plan. So want to have a conversation with you about that.
Absolutely. And we have a lot of resources that specifically compare defined benefit to defined contribution. Basically, it'll take you twice as long and cost you twice as much to have the same benefit in a defined contribution versus a pension. Not to mention, you don't have to shoulder all the risk yourself. So yeah, sounds like you've got some good talking points down already, but yeah, happy to have that discussion because it's constant, right? I mean, like these attacks on pension funds are just constant, and they want participants to feel like their money isn't safe. But again, it's by design, right? Like Wall Street makes more money. They're better off when workers have less voice over how their retirement savings is invested, and that's exactly what happens when you have a 401k, right? So yeah, let's talk.
Okay.
All right, and I think this might be the last question before we close down for the day, but please, Elizabeth.
Yeah, it seems like half the people on this thing are named Elizabeth in one way or another. I've never seen so many Elizabeths. I'm usually Betsy, but I put up my official name. I probably should have put Betsy. I have another question about, I am still having problems on getting my head around all of the student debt thing. Is the waiver, the thing before October, the waiver, because I do need to know about this so I can tell people, is this only for people who tried to apply in the past and didn't make it, or can people do it who never applied in the past for public? Does it have to be someone who actually applied and was turned down for some reason?
So the waiver does not only include people who applied in the past. It does include, or it can include, people who never applied. For example, I never applied because I came to the realization in early 2017 that I was not going to qualify because I got caught up in one of those loopholes. I have now applied under the waiver. So yes, you can do that. But you have to do it before October 31st is the key.